listen to this podcast, or I'll gut you.
Welcome back, horror hounds, to Ghostman Rivera's Horror Show podcast. Today we have author and former editor at Dread Central, Joshua Millican, on the podcast right now.
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me.
So how you doing today, man?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Feeling good. The weather's nice here in Southern California by the beach where I live, and it's been a really good week for me. How you guys doing?
Doing pretty good.
Pretty good. First of all, I'd like to thank you, first of all, for the work you did with Dread Central, and also you're one of the only publications who would put, we're very independent, very no-budget filmmakers up to this point, and you were the only one who would put our press releases and stuff up on your site, and I'd like to thank you for that.
That means the world to me. Dread Central has a great reputation as being a champion of the indie filmmakers and giving people kind of their first big exposure. It's one of the joys of the job is, allowing people who are just starting out to have a chance to be seen on this prestigious platform. I loved it. I tried to get as many out there as possible, and obviously what I saw in your release and your project resonated, and I figured it was something that horror fans would want to know about.
So we like to actually start when we do our interviews. We like to start at the beginning. So I wanted to ask you, where did you grow up, and was horror a big part of your childhood?
Yeah, I'm a third generation Los Angelino, and I started getting into horror. The summer it really hit for me and gelled for me was the summer of 1986. I was in my early, I don't even think I was a teenager yet, but that was the summer that Aliens and David Cronenberg's The Fly both came out. And Aliens had me glued to my seat, and The Fly had me wanting to jump out of my seat and bolt out of the theater. And they just both thrilled me on such different levels, but I was hooked. And then I had a neighbor who used to get like bootlegs, so he would show me all kinds of stuff. I saw Fright Night and Return of the Living Dead, and the horror, the 80s heyday, really just made an impression on me. But yeah, horror's always been a big part of my life. I went to college. I was interested in other things for a while, but I really got back into horror passionately again when Netflix started streaming things. Netflix used to just send you out the DVDs. And when they first started streaming, I was like, this is the best thing ever. And a lot of the horror movies that were on Netflix in the early days aren't there anymore. So I was really lucky to have, really binged on all that while I had the chance, because, a lot of the new French Extremity was up on Netflix in the day, and you can't find them there anymore. And just so many great films that I count some of my favorites you have to pay for now. But in the early days of Netflix, they were right there for the picking.
So what are some of the movies that made you want to go beyond being just a fan and make a career out of it?
I think it was kind of the new French Extremity. Like I was saying, Netflix had all these crazy horror movies out. So my mind was really expanding in terms of what's out there. I used to just get whatever Blockbuster had and think that I knew it all. And so I started telling my friends, I just saw this crazy movie, like with Martyrs. I was like, and then there was this compound underneath the house, and then it was about a cult looking for the afterlife. And people were like, you should write about this stuff because you're so passionate about it. So I was like, done deal. Started with my own blog, then started working for sites, and then through luck and tenacity landed at Dread Central.
What do you think is appealing about the horror genre? Why does it have so many dedicated fans?
There are 100 answers, but you're right that there is such a passionate fan base, and it's crazy because there are horror movie conventions, but there aren't comedy movie conventions. You know what I'm saying? There aren't bromance movie conventions. It's really unique to horror. I think part of it is that horror was kind of an ostracized genre for a long time, and so it attracts a lot of misfits from society. All of us who felt like we didn't quite fit in, we fit in with horror. It's transgressive. It talks about things that are always taboo of the time. And in the 80s, it was sex and it was Satanism. Satanic panic. So it was just it always just isn't afraid to go there, and it evolves with the times. I think it's a really great barometer for what society finds scary in the moment. And there's just so much to love.
I think the great things about horror is that it kind of reflects society at the time. I think you can throw any horror movie on from any era and you could get like a clue into a clue into what the time was like.
Totally. Like, we haven't seen it yet, but the next wave of horror is absolutely going to have been inspired by the pandemic. And we've had kind of like reactionary horror to that so far, a surge in pandemic movies. And then the whole, like what we're doing, kind of like the Zoom single screen movies, that was like an instant reaction to it. But I think we're going to find some new tropes coming to the forefront in the rest of this decade that maybe we're not predicting now. The same way, in the 2000s, found footage and zombies and torture porn really came into prominence. And I think all of that has to do with 9/11. So, it'll take a few years, but like in another 2 or 3 years, I think we're going to see some dominant subgenres of horror, coming to the mainstream. And I can't, truthfully, I can't even predict what it's going to be yet, but I'm excited to see it.
Tell us about the transition of writing about horror to writing your own horror stories. How did that come about? Did you write a long time about movies before you ever started writing your own stories?
No, it's interesting, and I'm glad you asked, because everyone knows me as what internet fame I have is mostly as the editor-in-chief of Dread Central. But what people don't know about me is I actually come from a creative background, so it wasn't a change. I was a creative writing major at UC Santa Cruz, which is one of the few universities in America that will offer a bachelor arts degree as an undergraduate. Normally there are MFA programs for writing, but I was really lucky to have gotten that as an undergrad. I was into slam poetry in the 90s. I was even in some bands in the 90s. And music and fiction were actually parts of my life right up until I went into journalism. So it's really like my first transition was from fiction into nonfiction. I always wanted to be a writer, and I assumed that would be as a creative writer in some sort. But I was just, I loved writing about horror movies as much as I loved writing about anything else. So it was fun and it was satisfying, and it still made me feel like when I started getting paychecks for it and paying the bills with it, I felt like I had really made it as a writer, even though I hadn't written a book or been, published anywhere except on the interwebs. So going back to horror, writing my first horror book, it's actually something I did a few years ago. And I put it on a shelf when I became first managing editor and then editor-in-chief of Dread Central, because I wanted to give Dread Central 100% of my focus. So it was only when I resigned, I went on paternity leave. My son was born, and I was like, okay, I've had a great tenure, which was almost exactly 10 years as a horror journalist. It was great to go out on top. But it was during, these months since that I took Deeper Than Hell off the shelf and I dusted it off. And, here's the thing, having written it years ago and coming back to it now, my journalistic skills have really sharpened up my creative writing skills. Journalism teaches you to cut the fat. It teaches you that every sentence should be a hook. It teaches you that you should never give your readers an excuse to click on something else, keep them engaged. And I took those same principles back to Deeper Than Hell, and I slashed it and I cut it and I sharpened it. And, Ghostman, like we were talking about before we went on, Deeper Than Hell is lean and mean. You can knock it out in 1 or 2 sittings. And I kind of like that about it. So yeah, to answer your question, Mr. Pickle, it wasn't a transition into fiction. It was a transition back into fiction. But, having written in so many different genres, having written in fiction and nonfiction, it all really helps. It's all like exercise, and it's all just really made me a better writer. And I'm thankful for the entire journey.
Cool.
I actually wanted to ask you about some of your influences, but before that, before we get to that, what were some of your favorite experiences at Dread Central, like visiting movie sets or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, visiting movie sets, you really nailed it right there. I got to, be on the sets of two very big, based on Stephen King productions. First, I was on the set of Pet Sematary, and that was up near Montreal, out in the rural areas there. And, they actually took us out they really made a pet cemetery. That wasn't on a set somewhere. It really was in the circle of trees, and they recreated the brambles leading off into the sour land and stuff like that, and just the attention to detail. I got to see John Lithgow do some acting, when we were up there. Just the fact that I traveled was great. Another one I did was for Dr. Sleep. And Mike Flanagan is just a prince. Got to talk to Ewan McGregor, who I've been a huge fan of forever. We were there like almost a full year before the movie was released. And of course, we signed NDAs. So I couldn't tell people that they recreated the Overlook Hotel, and they recreated it like down to the nail, but as though it had just been sitting vacant for the past 40 years. And, there were like blood stains at the bottom of the staircase where Jack, had been hit by the bat, was bleeding and stuff. And Mike Flanagan gave us all a tour of this. And up on the upper level, the actual hotel rooms were different sets that were still on location, but, it's like the doors didn't really have anything behind them, but they did have the hallways, and they did have an oversized big wheel, and they gave us a turn to just like ride around the Overlook like Danny did on this big wheel. And I mean, those experiences are priceless, One last one I want to tell you about was just the press junket I got to go on for The Nun. It was an international press junket, so they flew us all out to Mexico City. The Conjuring films have a huge impact. They're vastly popular in Mexico and South America. So they brought people out from all over the world to Mexico City, and then they took us to this actual abandoned monastery out in the middle of the jungle. And it was this crumbling, historical monument. They brought us into the main worship, the church, and they showed us the nun on the altar. It's like unbelievable experience, and so, Pet Cemetery was in Canada. Dr. Sleep was in Atlanta, but it was still amazing, these sets I got. And then getting to travel to Mexico, I got to go to all of North America during my time at Dread Central. And there were some amazing experiences. At the same time, when you say best experiences, a lot of them are just being at cons and talking to other horror fans and, just reveling in the positivity of the community.
And you also did some great interviews with people like Robert Englund, the Soska sisters, Tommy Chong, Tony Todd, Rob Zombie. What are some of your most memorable interviews?
You just mentioned them, and I'm so glad you did, because Encyclopocalypse, the publisher that just released Deeper Than Hell, later this year, we're going to release a collection of my interviews from Dread Central. 50-plus interviews, all assembled. It's probably going to be hardcover. We're probably going to have some great pictures in there, too. I'm really proud of the interviews I did, deep dives with a lot of the folks you mentioned. I had a chance to interview Crispin Glover, which was almost legendary, because he's got such a reputation as being so squirrely, such a gentleman, so thoughtful, so non-pretentious, nothing like the David Letterman kook you see on YouTube. That was great. David Arquette, just amazing to talk to him too, and it wasn't even about Scream. It was about the movie Spree. Where he played this kind of like father, and where we got to talk about, the way social media has changed everything, on my end as far as journalism, on his end, just in terms of being an actor. He says he worries that he's losing parts to other actors who have more Instagram followers, and that just blew my mind. So you'll be able to sit down with all of my interviews with everyone you mentioned, everyone I mentioned, and way more. There's going to be an index so you can, look up exactly the topic you want to read about, and look for that towards the end of the year. It might make a good Christmas gift for all you horror fans out there.
Awesome.
Nice.
I want to get into your book and some of your influences. Now, this could just be me, but when I was reading your book, a lot of it reminded me of a lot of Clive Barker's writing, and some of it reminded me a little bit of William S. Burroughs, like a little bit like a dash of that type of literary
Well,
style.
those are my two main influences right there.
Really?
As far as literature goes, that's awesome that you read the book but not the press releases, because that's right out there on my sleeve, and that's what I say almost right off. Clive Barker just is mesmerizing, and the way he starts off in a really grounded world and goes to some place that's truly horrific and right on the borders of dark fantasy was hugely influential, not just Hellraiser, but Midnight Meat Train. And having read Deeper Than Hell, this. Chapter 3 is basically my homage to Clive Barker. It's this cult of wannabe Cenobites, right? Who have, tried to completely blur the line between sex and pain, who have done these irreversible body modifications to themselves. And, that was my ode to Clive right there. William S. Burroughs, Naked Lunch, the author of Naked Lunch, and that story specifically, both the book and David Cronenberg's adaptation, and they're vastly different. David Cronenberg's version, for as confusing as it is much more cohesive than the book itself. The book itself is just nuts. But William S. Burroughs, I think, probably wrote the first psychedelic horror. And he also had a way of making heroin and needles just seem so seductive. And I've never done heroin, but at the same time, like it's fascinating to me, the idea of something that's so seductive that you'll throw away everything for, and you'll let it turn you into a walking corpse for. It's just always really fascinated me. So, those were my two main literary influences. Just going along with heroin, films like, Requiem for a Dream, Train Spotting, even Fede Alvarez's 2013 remake of Evil Dead. Those things all really influenced like how I, base my understanding of heroin, plus my own extrapolations. I've done psychedelic mushrooms and ecstasy, and I imagine like the most euphoric elements of that intensified. So, I did what I could do. But and also, I was just vastly influenced by all of horror cinema, in its entirety, in all its beautiful manifestations. And I try to allude to that all the way through with references and Easter eggs. Finally, I was hugely influenced by conspiracy theories. I love going on YouTube and jumping into some rabbit holes, and I rarely believe them, but I really admire the believability of them, and just that there are some mysteries that are still unsolved. It really fascinates me. So yeah, this is my first novel. I just tried to pack everything in, and I did it in a nice, slim 150-page tome that you can knock out in a sitting or two.
That blew me away about it. Like, I got like vibes, like some of it. The reason I'd say Clive Barker is because I'm a huge Clive Barker fan. Some of it reminded me a little bit of like Weave World. Some of it reminded me of the Scarlet Gospels, the Hell of the Heart. And the way that you went by it really reminds me a lot of Naked Lunch, just that kind of plunge into this drug-fueled insanity. So I really got heavy vibes off of both of those authors. And of course, all the other references that you throw in there as well to a bunch of...
Well, you got it, and I'm so glad you did. You were going to say something, Mike?
I was just going to say, I was actually surprised that, I hate to say this, but I was actually surprised to hear that you haven't done heroin before. Because reading it, I was like, this guy had to have done heroin before. He had to have spent time in some tunnels with some homeless people.
Well, I tell you, the William S. Burroughs, and who else I read was Jim Carroll, The Basketball Diaries. Jim Carroll described the ritual of it and the minutia of it, and it was really fascinating. But if you'll notice, when it gets down to heroin use in Deeper Than Hell, I don't really go into that kind of mechanical detail. I don't talk about the time off. I don't talk about the pricking the vein and the blossom of blood that shoots back up into the syringe. These wonderful descriptions that people like, Carroll and Burroughs have put out there, because that's not my world and that's not my experience. And maybe thankfully I've never done heroin because I've always been so curious about it. But no, I'm a cannabis dude, and I've always just been able to find my bliss on that natural thing. I don't know where you guys are living, but I hope it's legal where you are too, because it's a wonderful part of my life.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and you talk a lot about the warm oblivion, and you do make it sound seductive, but it's a place that I never want to go. You make it
Yeah.
sound euphoric, but also at the same time make it sound like a place that's so frightening.
Well, one thing and again, this is just my extrapolation, but one thing I try to say about this heroin addiction or addiction in general is that there's always got to be more to it than just the pleasure, right? It can't just be, oh, it feels so good, I'm just going to dedicate my life to this. There has to be something else that you're running away from, and we never really find out what it is about Drew that made him, run away and choose this life. But you do find out about, what brought Sonny to just kind of like giving up, it's, he's not an innocent by any means. You find out some very questionable activity on his part. But I do have a lot of empathy for, no, I haven't spent time in tunnels, but I've lived in places where there have been sizable homeless communities, and I've never shied away from interactions with anyone. So Santa Cruz, Venice Beach, I've just been able to kind of like seamlessly go between worlds. But there's just something about the homelessness is a huge issue. But homeless communities, there's something just really fascinating about that. It's tribal. It's a reflection of society, and there are no simple answers for why people choose to basically give up on everything. Jobs and expectations, and I think it has to do with these insidious substances, and I think it has to do with the pain that these people are escaping. So it's pleasure, but it's also the absence of pain.
So did you do any like research, or is this based more on experiences that you've already had with different homeless communities or with
it just as I took a lot of extrapolation from heroin from other sources. Yeah, I did do a lot of extrapolation. There's a documentary that came out in the 90s called Dark Days that was about homeless communities that were living in an Amtrak tunnel in New York City. And they had kind of gone above and beyond and really made these like homes, and yeah, we'd call it a shanty, but the people down there didn't consider themselves homeless. They had kind of like a code of conduct. That was really interesting. And then I read a nonfiction by Jennifer Toth, The Mole People. Yeah, I don't love that. I don't love the term mole people. It's dehumanizing. But that is the term that was used at the time when this book was written. No shade to Jennifer Toth. The book is legit. And, she does document a lot of different instances of people who do live underground in New York City. And not just your stereotypical wino, families and, people who had PhDs, mental illness for whatever reason. And, one of the things she alludes to in her nonfiction book is this idea that there are communities that are so subterranean, that are so self-sufficient that they rarely come to the surface anymore. And she didn't have any proof of. So Jennifer Toth was never able to prove that there really were these underground communities that were so self-contained and self-sufficient that they never came up again. Those were kind of like the legends that she had heard from other tunnel dwellers. Those were kind of like the urban legends amongst them. So I loved that. And finally, I saw, it must have been on Vice, a documentary about the Las Vegas tunnel specifically. And again, you had people who lived down there who said they didn't feel homeless because they had their homes kind of carved out. But also the thing about the Vegas tunnels is that they're made to divert flash floods away from the casinos. And they really do flood from time to time. So, in addition to all the other inherent dangers of being homeless, there's this literal danger of being swept away in a flash flood. And it's just so intriguing. And, those were the jumping off points. And I have been to Vegas. I've never been to New York. But I've been to Vegas a bunch, and Vegas is so wonderful and seedy all at once that it was just a really great place to kick everything off and to take some of these interests I've always had and dive in, no pun intended. But yeah, I've always been intrigued by the idea of life underground.
You describe in such stark detail, like the real factions of homeless people in the tunnels and stuff. And then as they go deeper and it gets into more fantastical parts of it, you describe those societies in just as much detail. But I seen a mirror kind of held up to facets of our society. Is that correct of me to assume that?
Yeah, absolutely. Facets of our society and just different interpretations of hell. It's like hell is different to different people. And chapter 3 was all about body horror and medical horror and, corporeal abuse. And chapters 4 and 5 are more psychological. There are chapters, that seem like, the stereotypical version of hell, like the Great Bottom, this society of sinners and outcasts. And then, ultimately I just tried to come up with something original and inspired. But yeah, it's about facets of society, people who are thrown away, people who feel like they don't fit in, people who are obsessed with technology. They're all in there, because I think that somewhere in there you'll find your own, something that resonates with you as what you visualize as hell. And ultimately, it's a conversation about what is hell.
One of the things that I like the book, it's definitely a descent into hell, but I feel like it could be interpreted in a variety of different ways. And there are a lot of times throughout the book where I'm wondering, is this like a drug-induced nightmare or is this actually happening? And then it gets to a certain point where it kind of leans one way or the other. And you don't have to answer this question, so I understand if you don't. Do you interpret it a certain way, or do you feel it's more up to the readers to take what they want from it?
Yeah, it's definitely up to the readers. And, I acknowledge that, and I toy with the readers early on by mentioning Jacob's Ladder, like this could be Jacob's Ladder. And whether or not even Drew's real, Drew says, maybe I'm your Tyler Durden, so it's absolutely supposed to be like, okay, this is too fantastic to be real. The simplest answer is probably what it is. And that's kind of what I like about the epilogue too, which is, in a completely different voice. The first 11 chapters, or the story itself is all first person from the point of view of Sonny. And then the epilogue is from his sister. And at the very end, I tried to do a little Twilight Zone twist, pull the rug out if you want one last time. I would say that there's really no answer if you stop at chapter 11, but if you insist on an answer, you can get it in the epilogue.
Yeah, because it seems to me to convey a very subjective experience where it got to the point where I wasn't sure if it was real or not. And then I was even starting to question if the part that started off grounded had elements of fiction thrown into it. It made me wonder if Drew was even real to begin with in the first.
Exactly. Okay. And I love of course you'd wonder that. Any smart reader or film viewer would wonder that. So, throughout Deeper Than Hell, I acknowledge that these are like the burning questions. It's more about the journey than the destination. Mm-hmm. If that bugs you, I'm sorry. But like I said, you can find your answer or you can have your own answer. That's fine. I love it,
I love works of art that kind of are more concentrated on conveying an experience necessarily than a solid story or plot, which is why I'm a huge David Lynch fan, and I'm a big fan of like surrealism and the type of literature that you're going for, like Burroughs and Barker, but really cool.
Well, chapter 9 is my ode to David Lynch, where he kind of like goes through that doorway. How's there a door, miles underground? And then he's in this like lodge, that was definitely my David Lynch.
Yeah, it's really like the Red Room and the way that the rooms keep shifting and you don't know where you're at and kind of just complicates your sense of reality.
And then he communicates with this entity through an old TV set. It was all very Lynch inspired, and I love that too. You definitely saw so many of my influences. I'm really, really stoked.
And you mentioned the epilogue. I love that epilogue. It's such a great cap to the story because it kind of grounds the story because you're getting a view of above ground, what was going on in his family's life,
Yeah.
But that last sentence, it's a mind blower and it's an emotional gut punch too.
Yeah.
Because your mind starts whirling about what was going on above ground this whole time.
Right. Because Sonny was wondering too, And
besides the great story going on here and the the great structure and the way you dive deeper and deeper into the story. It's the lines that make it special for me, because I love when a book has great lines that really grab you, surrounded by a great story and great narrative. Like there's one line in particular. It says, "Murderous Mardi Gras erupted with the hysterical violence of Vesuvius." Like I'd read anything just from that line.
Thank you. Yeah, that's quite a scene too. It was like, I just imagined a Hell Meets Burning Man for that moment, you know.
Yeah.
One of the things that I like about like your use of language in it, it's kind of it's punchy and it could come across like flowery a little bit. I don't know if that's the right word, flowery, but guttural at the same time.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I do come from like a poetry background, so I love, you know, languishing in beautiful language and you know, basking in psychedelic wordplay. So yeah, you know, there's absolutely that. But at the same time, Sonny is kind of an objective narrator, you know, through some of it. Some of the most vicious things he's very just cut and dry about, you know, like, yeah, you can't really get flowery when you're talking about, you know, tubes coming in and out of your body and, you know, all kinds of, but yeah, you know, it's very, gosh, it's very gross at times, isn't it? I'm not denying that. You know, I didn't set out to offend or to repel, but I wasn't going to shy away, you know, and I was going to bask in my influences like Clive Barker and, you know, even try to take things to the next level.
This story goes so crazy and so insane, but I love how it's grounded in realism throughout. Like, there's one, you know, a few experiences in this in particular kind of rang true for me. Like, the main character, Sonny, had almost exactly the same experience as my friend. He was institutionalized when he was 15 years old. He was misdiagnosed, and it actually made him an addict and made him a schizophrenic being put in there. So because of that, I noticed that this was a mixture of conspiracy theories, of real stories, and your imagination. What's the mixture there for you?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the ratio is, but you're absolutely right that I pulled from all of those equally. You know, very few of Sonny's actual experiences are my experiences. There are a few. You know, I think every writer inserts themselves into their prose in some way, because you write what you know, and the things that you're going to be able to convey most compassionately and genuinely are the things that are real to you. You know, readers and movie fans are very astute, and I think they have bullshit detection, you know. So when you write from what you know, it's infallible because it's your truth. But yeah, you know, there are a lot of true conspiracy theories in there in the sense of like Admiral Byrd was an actual admiral and a explorer and things like that. And a lot of the things I allude to are real. You know, Cheyenne Mountain is real, you know, deep underground military bases. But a lot of it is you know, complete conspiracy theories, complete conjecture. And a lot of it is even creepypasta. Not a lot, but I do pepper in some creepypastas in there, specifically the SCP Foundation and the Backrooms. So it's everything. It's a total hodgepodge. If it was a work of art, it would be a collage.
And I love how it blurs that line where you never know what's conspiracy theory and what's a real story that you pulled from history.
Right.
It starts making the conspiracy. Yeah, because the conspiracy theories start ringing true, and you start thinking, are they true?
Yeah. I mean, probably 75% of the shit out of Drew's mouth you could actually Google and find some reference for. And he even says, you know, I love watching YouTube videos of the library, you know, and you know, there's a lot of truth in with the craziness on YouTube. And, you know, that was an aspect of myself that I put in the character of Drew, as just somebody who loves doing research about the world on YouTube, because you can end up getting a very factual but very skewed idea of reality if that's your main source.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. One of the things I ever wanted to mention, you had a show called Chronic Horror Lots
Yes.
of connections between horror and cannabis subculture. And I think if you read this book, I could definitely see some of that influence there. Um, what do you think is the link between like cannabis subculture and horror, or even more specifically related to the book, the drug experience and horror?
Well, I don't think there's any direct link between cannabis culture and horror fandom, except I know an awful lot of horror fans who love cannabis. So, while the link isn't causal, there's a huge shared Venn space, on the diagram. And that's what Chronic Horror really wanted to appeal to. But Chronic Horror wasn't about stoner stereotypes. Although, I mean, come on, look at me. I'm a walking stoner stereotype. In time, I wanted it to be, something that promoted positive images of cannabis users. So we brought in a cooking element to it, and I'm a true believer in the idea that cannabis allows you to think about things on a level that maybe you wouldn't get to if you were stone cold sober. I love watching movies high. I think it helps, in terms of the immersion experience, in terms of actually experiencing the film along with the characters. I love writing about movies, with after having a hit or two, and I think that there are some intensely intelligent cannabis users. I think that the idea of a stupid stoner is really just so dated. So yeah, no direct connections, except don't we all know horror fans who also love to enjoy some top shelf cannabis? And isn't it a wonderful experience when you combine your love of horror with your love of cannabis?
Yeah.
But another thing I love about this book is all your references to multiple horror films. This is where your vast knowledge of horror really comes into play, because you reference. I'm just scratching the surface here. You reference Hellraiser, Human Centipede, Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and then even when you don't reference them at first, even when I thought that something was vaguely reminiscent of a movie, you'd have a character bring it up.
Yeah, like American Werewolf in London, and
Yeah.
like I mentioned before, Jacob's Ladder. I loved Chud, of course. Can't
Yeah.
have a story of life underground without acknowledging the Chuds running around. So I had a blast doing that, and yeah, it's coded for the true horror fans. It's also on its sleeve, because it's like saying people are going to be reading this going, I bet he was influenced by Hellraiser right here. Well, I used the word Cenobite, so I kind of beat the punch, and it's like, oh, you have a character with a needles coming out of his fingers. That's kind of like Freddy Krueger. Well, no, duh. That's what I say too, right here.
Yeah.
And again, it's not, I mean, I'm being a little snarky about it now. There's no snark involved. It's like, of course I'm influenced by horror. And, anyone who reads the book will probably be able to tell that I'm just as influenced by horror as I am by literature.
Mm-hmm.
Horror films, just as influenced by cinema as I am by literature.
I mean, one of the things that really like clues you into it is it's written in a way that tries to convey almost a cinematic experience in terms of like the visual details and the world building, and trying to like locate the reader within the sense of reality that's going on in the book. So I think you did a good job of like visualizing a lot of what you see. And I appreciate that. I'm a little bit more of a fan of writers that get really playful with their language and really try to go hard in trying to give visual representations of what you're supposed to be imagining, almost like you're watching a film. And
I had that in mind. I did try to write it with a cinematic eye. And at the same time, I'd written a couple screenplays where I was like, okay, I've got to keep the locations small, because if this is made, it'll probably be on an indie budget. With Deeper Than Hell, all that was out the window. Budget was out the window. It's like if they made this into a film, it cost what, $100 million to do like, 6 different complete world settings? No way. More likely to be a graphic novel than a movie. Or if it is a movie, they'd have to do it something like Dune and just spend $100 million to make it. But yeah, I loved that. In a way, it did make me feel like a filmmaker with a limitless budget. And I reveled in that.
Well, much like the narrative and the world building, I felt that it was that you were writing about what was happening in real time, Sometimes it was a drug haze. Sometimes it was a hallucination or a dream. And then by the time you realize this violence is happening, this intense graphic violence, you're in the middle of it with the character. So by the time you realize it's real, you're already in the middle of it. You almost don't have time to react to it.
Yeah, I mean, and this is such a turbulent time we're living in too. And like I said, I wrote this years ago. Obama was still president when I wrote it. And then coming back to it, 5-6 years later in this, actually much more scary world, I think I was able to make these parallels and make it feel very of this moment, hopefully.
Definitely. Yeah.
Would you ever want to see this turned into a film?
I would love to sell the movie rights. I'm a family man now. I'd love to put a little chunk of change in the bank, have some dependable income so I could write my next work of fiction. Yeah, I would love to see someone ambitious enough to make it into a film. That'd be awesome.
Not only, oh, go ahead.
No, you go, Michael.
Oh, not only that, I feel like every facet of the underground has a different movie in it. Like every time the main character reaches a different level, it's almost a different plane of existence, a whole different world that you build. I would think, okay, this is the rest of the book. This is where he's going to be the rest of the book, but it never settles anywhere. He just keeps diving deeper, and he dives deeper literally and figuratively. That's another thing I love about the book.
Thank you.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Okay, so would you ever be interested in, and I'd understand if not, in directing a movie yourself, or you making this into a film, or is that an endeavor that's not something?
Yeah. I have such respect for people who direct films that I just don't think I'd want to step on the toes of somebody who has that experience and has proven themselves in that arena. Making it as a first film, how freaking daunting. I mean, tip my hat to Clive Barker, who, did it for Hellraiser. He wrote the book and then he learned filmmaking and made the movie. That's great. I feel like I'm starting too far behind. I would want to leave it to professionals. But I'd love to be a consultant on the film. I'd love to have the director and the writer come ask me like, hey, is this what you had in mind? What do you think of this for a visualization of that idea? That would be great. But I'd also be willing to just take a hands-off approach. I have so much respect for the process of filmmaking and the people who have made the different aspects of filmmaking their career, the directors, the screenwriters, the special effects artists, that I really wouldn't want to muddy it up with my limited frame of reference. I'd want to let the professionals be professional.
Okay.
I thought it was funny that you even said the character even says in the book, if anybody made this into a movie, that would look ridiculous.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I guess, having said that in the book itself, it's always been on my mind and I'd love to. And, just in case you were thinking about this question too, I'd love to do a sequel. I'll give the people what they want. And it'll probably be something that kind of covers the same time, but from a different perspective, probably from the junk man's perspective, because you have this character Thaddeus who's in chapter 1 and then he pops up again in chapter 6. And Sonny even says, his own set of circumstances and misfortune that brought him to this place. So it'd be great to do Deeper Than Hell Part 2, the Junkman Chronicles. And junk is such a wonderful, it's the word for heroin on the street. And he becomes like this, spoiler, he becomes like this human transformer, so I'd love to do part 2 from Thaddeus's perspective and investigate different parts of this near limitless underground fantasy scape.
Yeah, you mentioned Thaddeus. It reminded me how much I loved that part, the initial attack when they get down into that big expanse, and that initial attack, you don't get to see exactly what happened. You kind of go with Drew wherever he goes. I mean, you go with Sonny wherever he goes, but then you get to come back through.
He says he was devoured, but whether that means, actually devoured or just kind of like consumed in the crowd is very open to interpretation.
Yeah, and I love how Thaddeus, he comes back in the later part of the story and he gives you a different perspective of what happened. So you get a different angle and a deeper understanding of exactly what happened in that moment. That was so cool.
Yeah, thank you.
I have to ask you, what is your writing process like when you start writing a book? Do you have like the outline of where it's headed, or is it more of a free form process where you trying to figure it out as you go
I
along?
did this time have an outline, and I think that's why Deeper Than Hell was successful. I had tried writing novels twice before, and I had been really inspired in the beginning, and then I just got too out into the weeds because it was open-ended, and it was like start at the beginning and you end at the end, and you just fill it with as much detail as possible. With Deeper Than Hell, I kind of had these artificial parameters. There had been this online literary magazine that actually put out a call for authors to write these serials. They wanted people to submit one chapter a month for an entire year. They wanted each chapter to be between 3,000 and 5,000 words. So they set all these parameters, and I entered the contest, and I didn't make it. I wasn't picked, but I had already written the entire first chapter, and I already had an outline for the whole thing, every bit, even the epilogue. So I had already imagined it all out. And that was integral to making this happen. And that was integral to kind of keeping it short. Yeah, I could have spent the entire book, in Tabernacle City, but like I knew according to my outline that Sonny was due to arrive at the Great Bottom by chapter 6. So it's like, okay, well, I can't languish here. I have to keep it short. I have to, fit this in within 5,000 words. So having these artificial parameters really helped me. And ultimately, I was able to throw the parameters out the window, because when I came back to it 5 years later and did editing on it, there were no rules, and I was just going to make it the best it could be. And I did a lot of revising, with time and my skill level having advanced being a benefit. That was my process. I did have an outline, and as much as artists hate parameters, it really helped me in this case, having an outline and really sticking to it. And it also helped me kind of jump ahead, because truthfully, the chapter 8, the sci-fi chapter, was really weak the first time I wrote it. But I was, because I knew what came next, I was able to kind of skip ahead and then come back and really kind of tweak it until I was happy with it, until I felt that it was just as strong as the other chapters.
Okay.
While you're discussing your process, you recently became Richard Elfman's biographer, where you're writing his biography right now. So
Yes.
How did that come about? Did that come about after you wrote Deeper Than Hell? And how is the process different?
Oh man, completely different. Yeah, it was after Deeper Than Hell, which is funny because there is an Elfman connection to Deeper Than Hell. We can discuss later, or maybe not. But Richard and I became friends before the pandemic, and it was through my work at Dread Central. And he and his wife Anastasia host these amazing dinner parties. And I had gone to a handful of those before the lockdown. And it was during the same period where I pulled Deeper Than Hell off the shelf, and I started thinking about the next chapter in my life now that I'm a father, what I want to do as a career. And I'm not leaving journalism behind. I'll always be a journalist, and I wanted to write a biography. And I knew this guy, and Richard really is one of the most interesting, exciting, exotic, erotic people I've ever met in my life. So I just asked him, I said, hey man, can I write your biography? He's like, let me think about it. I'll get back to you in a week or two. And he said yes. Now, that said, I don't think most biographers have the experience I have, and I am so lucky. This is an authorized biography, meaning Richard and I are in this. He is my number one source. It's his story as he wants it out there. So he would invite me over to his house in the Hollywood Hills, has this wonderful rooftop deck with a fireplace and a grill. He would cook for me. He's a gourmet cook, and that's something about him that people who don't know a lot about him are going to realize. And I just pressed the record button, and we would eat, we would drink. He'd have whiskey, I'd have wine. He'd smoke cigars, I'd smoke cannabis. And we did that for 2 or 3 hours, and we did that basically once a week for months. And I have like 30 hours of recorded conversations with him. And, that's, very quickly going to become, my main focus, after a few more weeks of promoting Deeper Than Hell and finalizing my collected interviews. The Richard Elfman book is just going to be on my front burner until it's done. And what I'm doing now is I'm lining up a lot of supporting interviews with people in Richard's life, and also people who have been influenced by Richard. and just going to have a really wonderful retrospective of this truly creative individual who's done music, film, art, cooking, and who is still making some of the best films of his life, and who wants to make Forbidden Zone too. And we all want him to do that too. And hopefully this book will help push it over the finish line. Yeah. So I count my blessings. Yeah, it's a wonderful experience.
So
I love the Forbidden Zone, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Oh yeah.
Is Richard Elfman aware that in your book his brother is working to start the techno apocalypse?
That his brother is non-human. Yeah, I don't know if he's read it yet because he's currently editing his next film, Bloody Bridget, which he's hoping to finish in time to go on the festival circuit this summer. So I know that he's, or this fall, I know that he's very, got his nose to the grindstone on that. So I'm not sure if he knows yet. I'm not sure if word has gotten back to Danny Elfman that his interdimensional identity has been exposed. But come on. In no way that guy was human. Did you really think he was a human all this time? But yeah, there is, like I said before, there is that Elfman connection, and yeah, Danny Elfman is an emissary of forbidden knowledge. So find out more in Deeper Than Hell.
You made me look at the song Just Another Day in a whole different light. Those lyrics rang so true to your book.
So true, and I think I knew that as the time listening to Oingo Boingo as a kid. I was like, what is he talking about? Life underground, and dreaming again of life underground, and it all just sounds hellish and apocalyptic. And I was like, that's perfect. I'm going to bring this song into it too. So yeah, the song Just Another Day is almost like a prequel to Deeper Than Hell.
I mean, one of the funniest parts in the book is when Drew's talking to him, and Drew believes all kinds of really out there radical conspiracy theories. And as soon as Sonny suggests Danny Elfman being a part of this, he's like, so you really think the guy who writes music for Tim Burton movies is right is involved in is colluding with the techno apocalypse? Yeah. Like, is that any more ridiculous than anything that you believe?
For sure, but then Sonny's totally like put in his place. He's like, no, I guess not. Glad you caught that.
Yeah,
that's another thing. When you think, wow, that's really outrageous idea, then the character points it out. That's an outrageous idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Why are you believing that?
Totally. What's wrong with you?
Because as a reader, you start to believe it too.
Hopefully, if you're fully immersed.
Oh yeah, I was the whole time. Everything that Drew said, oh, maybe it's true.
So, what are your plans for the future as far as being a novelist? Do you have other books lined up? Aside from the Richard Elfman biography, do you have any other fiction stories that you want to get out there, or do you have an idea of where you want your career to go?
Absolutely, I really am. As much as I feel kind of like I'm jinxing myself by admitting it. I'd love to do a sequel to Deeper Than Hell. I would love to. And I'd love to maybe work with some graphic artists. I'd love to see it adapted to a graphic novel because, like I said, the idea of making it a film seems so implausible. But, the idea of having a visual graphic novel companion is really interesting to me. So, graphic novelists, graphics studios, boom, Dark Horse, if you're out there listening, read Deeper Than Hell and let me know what you think. But yeah, in addition to writing a sequel, I have something that I'm working with. I have a novella that's more or less completed. That's kind of like a Satanic Panic era high school fucked up romance that's not for kids. So I think I'd like to kind of put that out there since there's been this whole resurgence of Satanic Panic with the whole QAnon Pizzagate stuff, although that's all 5 years ago now, but still it's I never thought I'd see that again. But Satanic Panic is a really scary part of nostalgia. They just kind of scratched the surface of that on the latest season of Stranger Things. But yeah, I'd love to write more about Deeper Than Hell, about life underground. I'd love to get the Satanic Panic era novel out there. And, I'm always looking for the next inspiration.
With all these things in the works, how are you finding time to act? Are you auditioning? What are you doing as far as acting goes?
I am getting occasional gigs. You'll be able to see me in Apex Predator 2, which I think is releasing sometime in July. I know the red carpet event is happening at the end of July. I just did another film for Dustin Ferguson, which I'm not at liberty to discuss right now because it's all hush-hush. You might have caught me a small cameo in The Gingerweed Man. You know, I'm putting myself out there. You know, I don't have a lot of time, but I love experiencing that aspect of filmmaking. You know, all of the majority of the offers I've gotten to be in film came from, you know, Chronic Horror and people who saw me on Chronic Horror and would be like, you know, can you play my stoner in this movie? And I was like, I'd be happy to, you know, but, you know, acting's definitely smaller, you know, gets less of my time, but, you know, I pretty much jump at the chance to do anything I can.
Before we go, are there any modern horror movies that you are a fan of?
I love Fede Alvarez's remake of Evil Dead. I love it, and I expected to hate it in 2013. You know, I went to the theater going, how dare they remake this film? But of course I'm going to see it so I can rag on it. And I love it. You know, I love that. I love The Mist. You know, there's probably some of that influence in Deeper Than Hell. I love the film. I've got the DVD that has both the color and the black and white versions. I love that hardcore ending, you know, which is just so ballsy, so taboo, and just so impactful. I love it.
Very different from the ending of the short story, well, semi-short story.
Right. Leaves it much more open-ended. But yeah, I love those flicks. And, you know, I just watched Off Season on Shudder, which has gotten a little bit of buzz. It's awesome, you guys. If you have Shudder, you should check it out ASAP. It's really a wonderful Lovecraftian, Southern Gothic horror story. It got some great characters, some great sets, you know, misty, stormy, just wonderful. A great film. So, you know, a couple of my all-time favorites and one of my recent favorites. There you go.
So it's called Off Season?
Off Season, yeah.
All right, I'm going to check that out.
It's fantastic. Check it out tonight.
Okay, cool.
And there's something I have to ask you. You recently became a father, as you mentioned. So what's it like being a father now, and how has that changed the trajectory of your career?
I mean, it changes everything. You know, it's like life naturally falls into chapters depending on, you know, geography and jobs and relationships. But when you have a kid, it's like a whole new volume of your life, you know, especially when you have a kid in your 40s like I did. You know, it's like, you know, everything's different now. And it's made me more serious about my career. You know, that's why I can't go back to Dread Central or any place to be an editor-in-chief, truthfully, because I don't have 60, 80 hours a week to devote to a website. And you know, the pressures of staying up to date, you know, in a news-driven community. There's always a sense of urgency when you're talking about the news. If you're not at least somewhat urgent when it comes to news reporting, then you've missed the boat. Then you shouldn't even be reporting news because it's already out there, and you know, all you're doing is, you know, creating a feedback loop. But yeah, I want to be a writer. I want to be able to write at night when my kid's asleep. I want to be able to write on weekends, and you know, I want to be able to set my own hours. So yeah, it absolutely changes everything.
What's the name of the publisher that you're working with?
Encyclopocalypse, and they are awesome. I can't sing the praises of the company enough. You know, being a first-time novelist, it was founded by Mark Allen Miller, who ran Clive Barker's literary imprint, Seraphin. Yeah, I've been working with Sean Durger, who's basically been my contact there, and you know, my I don't know what to call him because he's the one who really brought me in and really championed Deeper Than Hell the whole way. Preston Fassell, the author of Our Lady of the Inferno, works on the marketing side with Encyclopocalypse. He's been a great asset. Encyclopocalypse is primarily known for doing novelizations of horror movies. So it's kind of perfect for me because I come from this world that's more on the horror movie side, but now I'm doing something literal. You know, and they also release fiction by people who you normally associate as filmmakers, like Mick Garris and Peter Atkins. You know, Encyclopocalypse has released the fiction from those filmmakers. So it's just been the perfect place for me, and they've just treated me wonderfully. They're the ones who are going to release my collection of interviews don't know yet where the Elfman biography but they've just been wonderful to me, and I couldn't say more wonderful things about them.
I'm really excited for your future. I can't wait for everybody go out and check out Deeper Than Hell. Read this book. It's very entertaining. It's disturbing. It's thought-provoking. It's mind-blowing. And then after this, you got an interview book coming out. You got the Richard Elfman biography, possibly a Deeper Than Hell sequel, hopefully in the future. So a lot of cool things coming up from Joshua.
Yeah. So beautiful cover art by Christian Francis, also part of the Encyclopocalypse family and a talented writer of himself. I'm going to read you guys a little bit from chapter 1, where it's still somewhat grounded, but this is where Sonny kind of talks about how the community who live in these tunnels underground have kind of segregated themselves by tribe based on drug of choice. And it's also where you get the first slight hint, although it's really easy to just kind of dismiss, you get the first slight hint of a potentially crazy cosmic world beneath the surface. And it's first person in the voice of Sonny. We lived in the open space about 150 yards down from one of the main runoff channels, just southeast of the strip. It's a sizable chamber, a convergence point for dozens of drainage pipes. At night, refracted flashes of neon still manage to find their way inside. It's mostly inhabited by other addicts, and we organize ourselves like tribes based on drug of choice. Heroin heads and pill poppers just want a quiet, comfortable place to shoot and crash. We cluster along the east wall in a series of sheds and shanties. You can always find a lit burn barrel and to warm up beside, or a couch to flop on. So many old couches have been dragged down there you could probably reconstruct Stonehenge with them. Crackheads are generally older folks in their 40s or 50s, Cold War throwbacks from a pre-meth era. They keep to themselves for the most part, sometimes forming small circles to cook by campfire or to watch sports on TV. Despite common stereotypes, crackheads are a generally mellow bunch. Still, a lot of people consider them subhuman or lost causes, irreparably damaged, feeble-minded, constantly picking up pebbles, more akin to animals or creatures than people, slaves to the strict commandments of a lesser god. Meth heads make up the largest tribe by far, and it sucks because you really have to watch out for them. They never sleep, which means they never stop spinning. Some of them cook product, polluting the already stagnant air with nauseating plumes of sulfur and ammonia. Every other night's a nonstop cacophony of feuding, fighting, and fucking. Meth heads are prone to violence, exasperated by audio and visual hallucinations linked to sleep deprivation. Everything about them feels toxic. I've seen stabbings, rapes, even a full-fledged riot that sent us running for our lives amid gunshots and Molotov cocktail volleys. The newest tribe on the rise is comprised of the spice addicts, aka the face eaters. Obviously, these fuckers scare the hell out of me. I once saw a guy worked into such a frenzy that he started running full speed into a wall, over and over. Finally, when he was gushing from his nose and forehead, he backed up for one last sprint, screaming like Braveheart as he charged the wall. When he hit, there was this quick flash of dark blue lightning and the scent of afterburn, and he was gone. It was like he had just glitched out, like he had just run through the fucking wall, leaving a pulsating mass of blood, snot, and bile and a warped silhouette. Yeah, I was high at the time, but that's exactly what I saw. Heroin isn't a hallucinogen. There's something exceptionally insidious about spice.
Awesome.
Oh, very cool.
So one last thing before we go. I know that this book is available on Amazon, but is there a particular website you'd prefer people to buy from where you might benefit more off of it?
No way. Just go to Amazon. That's its home for the time being, and Amazon has its issues, but it is a great promoting thing when your book is doing well. I'm proud to say it's been a few days as the #1 new release in American horror. It's at #2 now, but it's still there. Not only is it important for people to buy the book on Amazon so it stays up in their algorithm, it's important to have folks review it. And I really hope you guys will take a few minutes to when this is wrapped up to go online and leave a little review, because the number of reviews really does matter in terms of it getting into people's feeds as suggested content, staying high visibility in terms of a new release. and in terms of all of the horror bestsellers. So yeah, please go to Amazon. Please check it out. Please leave me a review.
Perfect. Well, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on. It was really fun to have you on. Really like the book, and I look forward to seeing whatever you're going to do in the future, whether it's more books, biographies, anything that you do.
I want to do it all. And thanks to you guys, man. You guys have been so wonderful. Anyone wants to follow me should hop on Twitter and go to Josh_Millican, Millican. Maybe you guys will drop that in the description. But yeah, follow me and I'll keep you up to date on all of the things I'm working on.
Yeah, we urge all our listeners to read Deeper Than Hell and then go give it a review on Amazon.
Yes.
Definitely a good read. Very visual.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so glad you guys enjoyed it. And thank you so much for putting so much thought into it and asking me such intelligent, thoughtful questions. I really appreciate it. It's been great. You guys really get it. And it's really heartening for me. So thank you. And thank you for allowing me your platform to discuss my book.
Yeah, I was already excited to talk to you because I've known you for so long from Dread Central, and then after I read the book, I was even more excited. I was just aching to talk about that book.
Fantastic, and you can have me back on, man. Anytime.
Definitely.
Love to have you back on as a guest.
Well, we'll talk about whatever I'm working on, or we can just talk about horror.
That would
sound good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, guys.